like to thank Norm Stahl for such a wonderful alliterative title and also the opportunity to give this presentation. Now, the word vocabulary didn't fit into the alliterate title, so we use the term terminology, but it is vocabulary of the 5 pillars of literacy that has the greatest potential to be impacted by AI. And directly, the texts that are used for fluency and automaticity. I can't anticipate that we're going to find any new phonics patterns or even new comprehension strategies, although AI may require many more different comprehension capabilities. But it is in vocabulary that AI is particularly proficient in supporting a new view of what to teach and how to teach. Now, AI wasn't initially a natural language processing system. It was a computational or equation system, but it has been prolific in being able to take large databases and to be able to tell us about language use in different contexts. English has an enormously large corpus of words, a large lexicon or dictionary, larger than most languages. What we've typically done for at least the last century in reading instruction has been to cherry pick a group of words from a text and then to focus on those words for an extended period of time, typically a week of instruction. When you look at these 6 words that come from a 3rd grade core reading program, I'd be hard pressed to actually tell you what this story is about. And there are an enormous amount of different words in this text that haven't been considered. Why not? Why those particular words? Well, we have the opportunity now with AI, because of the available corpora and also databases, to actually take a different perspective. When we look at available corpora, I want to point out that in terms of typical text, we've got some enormous databases, like the COCA, which is really readily accessible, that has at least 1 billion words, and that is refreshed every year with magazines, newspapers, and academic text. The situation is a little different with school text. If you were to go online and attempt to get a scanned version of, for example, Beverly Cleary's books, that might be pretty difficult, unless it's from a very shady website. Metametrics has the largest database of school text, but that is a proprietary database for those who work for Metametrics. And really what we're left with at this point is the TASA or Xeno database that is based on about 17 million words of school text. And I'm going to underscore this idea of school text because especially in the primary grades, the words in text are not those of the typical texts that are read by adults. Not, of course, the most frequent words, like the Dolch list, but the words that comprise the rest of the text. Now, one of the things about the TASA database is that it's not, it doesn't make the actual text available. But consequently, at Text Project, we've been working on amassing a database of the words in school texts. And at this point, we have about 9 million words. And as you can see, it's the words in K1 that are the most difficult to get a really large database of because the texts are very short. Another shift in vocabulary learning that is probably as massive or even more massive than the ability to look at these large databases is the availability of databases of word features. Now, when I started the Word Zone Profiler, which is the word analyzer that I use at Text Project, we basically had two dimensions that we were looking at, the decodability of words and the frequency of words, and as well as getting the count of the words in the text, but that's a pretty peripheral kind of thing. In 2020, here's an example of the 16 variables that I had available. So each of these variables, like age of acquisition, superclusters, complex morphology, represents a way to tag a word. And when we enter the words for a story, we then get an analysis of all the features of every single word. Today, in the scope database, and these are the same words that I've been showing you previously, there are about 250 250 ways in which we can characterize words. So things have really changed. We can describe the trajectory of words, which we weren't able to do even a few years ago. We can describe the orthographic patterns and so on. I'll come back to the notion of what trajectory is. So how do we use these tools to identify vocabulary for specific text? Well, one of the things that one needs to do is ask, what's the theme? And in this case, I actually used, and in this presentation, I'm going to be using the AI platform of Claude AI, and ask Claude what the central theme is. And so the theme is about a welcoming community space. Those are the words: slender, gallant, chime, preparation, flickered, and concluded, that represent the story, the storyteller's candle. Excuse me. Next thing I do is I go into the word analyzer, the Word Zone Profiler, and I look to see how many words we have that are fairly rare. So zones 6, 7, and 8 represent words that appear 9 or 1 or less than 1 time per million. And we have 121 words in this zone in this particular text. 82 of those words are Spanish words, and we're going to have a lesson on Spanish words. But in terms of building the word study, because remember, these books have been purchased to help improve children's reading, there are 39 remaining words that are left in this particular distribution. When I look at, how frequently, so the U function is the frequency with which words appear. The age of acquisition tells us when words appear in children's oral language environments. So it says that twinkling appears at about age 4.5. And dispersion tells us how frequently the words appear across different subject areas. Higher dispersion is something you want because you want words that are actually going to be extended across different contexts. I then ask AI to take these words, and what AI did is put words in categories of light effects, the response to the fiesta, and the preparation. Now, some of the same words actually flickered in preparations, are in the list of words that the publisher pulled out. But what we have is a very different organization of the words around a theme. We're actually giving kids capability to see how words are connected and to see how authors develop particular parts of stories. We also can use the tools to identify vocabulary at developmental levels. Remember, I was saying that there's some big differences between the kinds of vocabularies that are present in the text for young children versus middle grades and then onto high school, which looks more like typical text. Now, we've used the databases and also the various word feature databases to identify for the words that occur now for first grade. About 96% of the words in the text can be explained by 2,500 morphological families of the very most frequent words. And then for the words that appear in the low frequency group, the pink group, there are about 3,000 morphological families. Now, the point is, when I talk about this, people often want the lists, assuming that you're going to teach students all the words on these lists. But the words from these different morphological family groups differ a lot by developmental level. So the same percentages, pretty much, are evident in grade 3 and in grade 5. But in fact, the specific words in these groups can differ quite a bit. So for example, if we're looking at the words in the 3,000 group at first grade, we want to say which of those words can we expect will appear and which words might need to develop vocabulary related to these groups. What we do is we actually use another measure that's called trajectory to begin identifying which of the words in this group of approximately 3,000 words that appear 9 to 1 time per million would we expect would appear in beginning text. And the trajectory tells us, so a trajectory of minus 2.72 to 1 tells us that the words are likely to appear early in text and then they begin to wane. So when we get to the middle grades, there are words that begin to appear at that point, different trajectory, and then either stay flat or actually increase in prominence across the grades. Now, I'm not going to go into the continued work we do to vet these words, but you're getting an idea that with these databases, we can actually get pretty precise in what words we expect are fairly common in the text that students will see at different points in time, which helps us in word selection. Okay, the next topic are texts. The current approaches in AI, so we can go to websites and get texts that are claimed to be generated around particular phonics patterns. In this case, the developer Project Read has generated text that correlate with the University of Florida's literacy intervention. And as you can see, in this case, it actually has a picture. But to get that picture, I actually had to nominate 3 educators, give their websites to actually get the picture. So typically what you're getting is a pictureless text. Happily, I have a number of different emails, so I was able to get the picture. But you can't do that for every single text. You have to have different colleagues whose names you give. A second thing that is easily done with text in different websites right now with using AI is to change the text level. So they promise that you can get any text level. This is a text that was used on the 8th grade NAEP, and the text on the right claims to be a 2nd or 3rd grade version of that. Now, we need to do lots of analysis to see exactly what's been changed. It's not as straightforward or as simplistic as was in the first generation of text like Newsela, but in fact, you can see that there's still considerably shorter text for lower levels. At Text Project, what we've been doing is an iterative process to develop text, an iterative process of giving directions to AI and then using the word zone profiler to actually determine if the texts are fitting the parameters. Now, an important thing about creating texts in AI is that you need to begin with the parameters. So this is a project that I'm currently involved in. It's called the Choral Assessment that I'm doing with my colleagues at Roar at Stanford. And the second level of this assessment is on bats. And I'm aiming for about 50% of the words to have short vowel patterns. This is actually the data that came out of these texts. So this isn't the aim. I was aiming for about 75%, excuse me, to have high frequency words. I'm interested in the age of acquisition being for first graders below 6, if I can get it, and then actually fairly short words. As you can see here, I'm really concerned also of not having many two-syllable words. So this is the aim that I have. So I've got a parameter of features, and then I ask AI if they can take a text that I've generated at some point, an earlier point, and increase the number of short vowel words. So this is what AI provides for me. So there are words like flaps and dash, but there are also words like position and danger and threat. So in fact, I take a look at what AI has done, and then there's another revision, and here you see the final text. Okay, so some of the words are retained and some of them aren't. Now, I want to emphasize that at Text Project, we've really looked at informational texts and on books. And the reason for this is that by reading informational text, you're actually expanding your knowledge, which is such an incredible, important component in an AI world. And by looking at more extended texts than the one that you saw, these one-page texts, we're actually having the opportunity to see words repeatedly. Okay, so here's an example of a text that actually, for the most part, was written by AI. But one of the things that I think is incredibly critical for a generation of children is to have interesting and relevant pictures, not pictures for picture text match, which is problematic, but pictures that actually give you some context and motivate you to read. So here's an example of a text around dough and other baked goods. This actually is a topic that emanated out of the words that we can expect to see in early reading text of the earlier analysis that I was doing. Okay, so you can see that there are words that are repeated often, the word dough, words like buns, the key words will be repeated. And there's something of interest. Now, the situation is a really different one when we try to write stories. The thing about stories is that there needs to be an interesting hook. And at this point, many of the stories that are coming out of AI, as this one, and this was a story that I used the same words as in the informational text for AI, dough, buns, loaf of bread, muffins, and I think biscuits. And this is the text that I got. And these are cartoons that the AI offered to me as compelling for young children. So you can actually see that this is a pretty vacuous text. And there's a lot of personification of inanimate objects. I don't think that there'd be a lot to learn here for students. And the interest level, I think, differs very much from what I was showing you with the informational text. Another way in which we've been using AI at Text Project is in computational modeling. And I've been working with Devin Kearns and Matt Cooper Borgenhagen to look at the effects of exposure to different types of books, like decodable text in trade books. Here's a paper that we presented at the Society for the Study of Reading in Copenhagen. And you'll be hearing more about these results over the next few months. But I think this is something it's very difficult to do tight comparisons of kids reading different texts. And machine learning AI provides a context in which we can do that. Okay, so our final topic is the topic of teachers. And of the three dimensions of terminology, text, and teachers, I think as teacher educators, we've got an incredible opportunity in terms of supporting our teachers who are candidates and also our in-service teachers, in actually having some material to act on in a way that we haven't had before in terms of curriculum and text. We've often been using videos of classroom instruction. What I'm suggesting here is that we can support teachers in understanding what it is that kids need to learn in a much better way than we have in the past with AI. We've done one project, and actually it's been spearheaded by Sam DiGiulio and Catherine Lammert, which we published an article about in The Reading Teacher, in which teachers worked to create text that had the appropriate decoding demands and also complied with the interests and expertise of kids with whom they were tutoring. But let me give you three examples that I think are particularly germane for teachers, I'm saying, acting on texts and tasks. The first is looking at the demands of text. So I'm going to just show you a conversation that I had with Claude AI. Excuse me. And here I'm asking, what coding skills would a first grader need to read this passage? And AI gives me a sense of what it is. And actually, when I look at these, it's a fairly in-depth list of things that kids need to know, including R-controlled vowels, including common digraphs, and so on. Then AI asks me if I'd like to see some modifications for specific decoding levels and gives me a set of texts that differ in terms of the decoding demands and also the high frequency word demands. I think this can be incredibly useful as teachers are looking at profiles of their students to see what would make a text readily accessible for students. A second category I think is really essential, and that is related to silent reading. So we've been doing so much with oral reading, and in terms of silent reading, we've been actually prohibited in terms of a lot of the assessments we have. And I'm demonstrating here that the maze or close assessment is something that can easily be created. And I've given AI instructions that the words need to be the same length as the target words and so on. And it actually turns out that I did about 14 rounds of interaction to get the final text, and then it actually will randomly sort the words. But this also supports teachers in reading text to see what makes sense and what doesn't. A final thing is, I think, analyzing semantic networks is really a critical aspect of teaching kids both in terms of comprehension and vocabulary. And in this case, AI is just fantastic at giving you semantic grids of words. And I've asked for some words that both are new to kids, like piteously probably, but also words that might already be in their vocabulary, like sad and upset. Okay, so what I've suggested today is that vocabulary is an area of the curriculum that has great potential. There are some limitations in what we can do with text, especially narrative ones in terms of the creation of text. But I've also said that in terms of teachers, there's, I think, an incredible opportunity to act on language. So one of the things that I see as some problems is that we're going to have an even larger world of worksheets and fewer opportunities to deal with complex text if we're always asking for simplifying text. There's also the perception that everything can be individualized. And before we go into complete individualization, which requires very accurate understandings of student proficiencies, I think in areas like vocabulary and the kinds of texts that support automaticity, we would do well to actually look for underlying curriculum that extends across groups of kids as well as individuals. Finally, I think a real problem is that the very thing about AI is the access to knowledge. But I think fatuous texts and worksheets could be an incredible barrier to knowledge acquisition, as well as a deterrent to motivation and learning. And finally, I think a great possibility is the opportunity for our teachers to actually act on language, to see what makes text difficult, and to actually see how words are connected, for example, with the semantic grid. So thank you so much for your time. I am looking for partners who are interested in projects such as the one that Sam and Catherine and I did. And here is the email at which I can be reached. Thank you very much.